There's a moment in everyone's life when they realize that loyalty doesn't work the way they thought it did. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in a surgeon's waiting room, holding a bill I couldn't pay, realizing that the people I'd spent my entire life protecting weren't going to protect me back. My name is Sarah, and I want to tell you something that I've carried silently for 3 years. Something that changed the way I understand family, respect, and what it actually means to have someone's back. If you've ever felt invisible to the people closest to you, if you've ever questioned whether sacrifice actually matters, please stay with me. This story isn't just about money or surgery. It's about the moment I stopped asking for help and started understanding who actually valued me. I grew up military. My father was Army career officer, the kind of man who believed in duty, honor, and doing things the right way. We moved 17 times by the time I was 18. I learned early that our family's identity was built on service, not just my father's service, but all of ours. We were a military family, and that meant something. It meant loyalty. It meant sacrifice. It meant that we took care of each other when nobody else would. I followed that path. I joined the Army myself at 22, right out of college. My parents were proud in that quiet, controlled way military families are proud. There were no big celebrations, just a firm handshake from my father and my mother telling me to write when I could. But I understood. I was doing what we did. I was serving. I was honoring something bigger than myself. For 14 years, I served. I was a combat medic, and then later, a surgical technician. I was good at what I did. I saved lives. I held dying soldiers' hands and told them they were going to be okay. And sometimes they were. I moved through my service with the same quiet dignity my father had shown me growing up. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for special treatment. I did my job, and I did it well. But 14 years of the kind of work I did takes something from you. You don't see it happening. It's not dramatic or sudden. You just start to notice that your hands shake sometimes when you're not expecting it. That certain sounds trigger something in your chest. That you wake up at 3 in the morning sometimes with your heart racing, and you lie there in the dark, trying to remember where you are. I was medically discharged at 36 years old. I had a shoulder injury that never healed properly, repetitive stress from years of lifting, stabilizing, holding people in ways that weren't meant to be sustainable. The injury itself was manageable mostly, but it was my knee that was the problem, the real problem. I don't want to get too deep into the medical details, but basically, my service had worn my body down in ways that couldn't be fully repaired without major intervention. My left knee had been giving out for years. I'd done physical therapy. I'd done injections. I'd done everything they tell you to do. But eventually, my doctor sat down with me and said that surgery was the only real option. Without it, I was looking at increasing disability, pain management for the rest of my life, and honestly, a serious decline in my quality of life. The surgery was going to cost around $20,000. Even with my VA coverage, I was going to be responsible for about $5,000 out of pocket. $5,000 doesn't sound like an impossible amount of money until you don't have it. I was working at the time, managing a physical therapy clinic, work I could do, work that didn't aggravate my shoulder, work that kept me connected to the medical field I loved even though I couldn't serve anymore. But I wasn't making a lot of money. The medical industry doesn't pay well unless you're in administration, and I'd never gone that route. I was comfortable. I paid my bills. But I didn't have $5,000 just sitting in a savings account. Not by a long shot. So I did what you do in that situation. I called my parents. My father answered the phone. He was retired by then, fully retired, living in Arizona in one of those communities with the golf course and the early dinner specials. He was financially secure. He'd been careful with money his entire life, the same way he'd been careful with everything else. He invested well. He and my mother lived comfortably. They weren't wealthy, but they had resources. I explained the situation to him. I didn't ask directly at first. I just explained. I explained the surgery, the cost, what it meant for my future. I explained that I was trying to figure out how to make it work, but that it was tight. I was giving him the opening to offer help if he wanted to. That's how these conversations work in military families. You don't ask directly. You present the situation with quiet dignity, and then you wait to see if someone steps forward. My father listened. Then he said, "Sarah, I understand. That's difficult. But your mother and I have worked hard for what we have. We can't just give money away like that. You understand that, don't you?" I did understand it. I understood it perfectly. And I remember feeling something shift inside my chest as I said, "Of course, I'm sorry for bothering you about this." My mother got on the phone after him. She was more sympathetic, the way she always was. She asked more questions about the surgery, about what would happen if I didn't have it done. But when I gently mentioned the financial piece, she echoed what my father had said. They'd worked hard. They couldn't just make financial decisions like that without careful planning. Maybe I could look into payment plans. Maybe the hospital had financing options. I got off the phone and sat in my apartment for a long time, not really thinking about anything in particular. I did look into financing options, by the way. The hospital had one, but it came with an interest rate that was going to add another $3,000 to the cost over the life of the loan. So instead of $5,000, I was looking at $8,000 in total debt for a surgery that I medically needed. I was trying to figure out how to make that work when my brother called me. My brother Marcus is 4 years younger than me. He's never served. He's never been in the military. When I joined up, he was still in high school, and by the time I came home for my first leave, he was already charting a different path. He went to community college, then worked his way through a state university. He's an accountant now, which I mention because it matters to the story. Marcus understood numbers. He understood financial situations. He understood them in a way that most people don't. We'd always been close, but the way military families spread out, you don't get to see each other as much as you'd like. He'd heard from my parents that I was having surgery and needed to figure out the financial piece. He called me, and I remember exactly where I was when he called. I was in my car, driving home from work, and I almost didn't answer because I didn't want to have this conversation. I didn't want to explain the situation again, to have someone else try to problem solve or minimize what I was going through. But I answered. "Hey," he said. "Mom and Dad told me about your surgery." "Yeah," I said, "it's fine. I'm working on it." "Sarah, it's not fine," he said. "How much do you need?" I told him. I told him that the surgery was going to cost around $5,000 out of pocket after insurance, or closer to $8,000 if I went with the financing option. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Don't do the financing. Send me your surgery date and the billing information." "Marcus, no," I said. "Absolutely not. You can't." "I can, and I am," he said. "You're my sister. You served. You gave 14 years and now you're in pain and you need surgery. This is what family does. Don't argue with me about this." I argued with him anyway. I told him that he was just starting out, that he had student loans, that he wasn't in a position to be giving away money like that. He was making decent money as an accountant, but he wasn't rich. He was responsible and smart with money, which is why I knew this was a real sacrifice for him. But Marcus had always been like that. He was the kind of person who didn't think twice about helping someone he loved. He would have given you the shirt off his back if you needed it. I'd always known this about him. I just never thought he'd have to prove it this way. He sent me $8,500, not the $5,000 I needed, not the $8,000 the financing would have cost. He sent me an extra $500 with a note that said, "For whatever else you need." I cried when that money hit my account. I sat at my kitchen table and cried the kind of tears that come from a place of deep relief and deep shame mixed together. My parents, my father especially, who had raised me with all these lessons about duty and sacrifice and taking care of your family, had said no. My little brother, who had no obligation to me, who had his own life and his own responsibilities, had said yes without hesitation. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. I had surgery 3 months later. It went well. The surgeon said she'd gotten everything fixed, that with proper physical therapy, I'd have a very good outcome. I should be able to go back to full activity eventually. I started my recovery, and I did my physical therapy with the same discipline I'd done everything else in my life. But I was thinking about other things during that recovery. I was thinking about what loyalty actually means. I was thinking about the fact that my brother had sacrificed something real for me, while my parents had protected their comfort instead. Here's the thing about being in a military family. There's a lot of talk about honor and loyalty and sacrifice. But sometimes those words become hollow. Sometimes people say them without understanding what they actually cost. My father had served his country honorably. He'd put his career first, moved his family constantly, made decisions that prioritized duty over comfort. That was his sacrifice, and it was real. But he'd done it believing that it earned him something: security, a certain kind of respect, a place in a particular kind of hierarchy. And now that he was retired and comfortable, the idea of sacrificing comfort for his daughter felt like it was asking too much. My brother had none of that. He had no military background, no sense of obligation beyond simple love. When I needed help, he helped, because that's what people who love each other do. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't a transaction. It was just what family meant to him. I recovered fully from my surgery. The physical therapy worked. After about 6 months, I was able to do most things I'd done before. I went back to work at the physical therapy clinic. I started going to the gym again. I started living my life without chronic pain for the first time in years. And I didn't tell my parents any of this. That was the beginning of a shift that I'm not entirely proud of, but that I understand was necessary. I didn't call my father and tell him that I'd had the surgery and that it had gone well. I didn't tell my mother that I was pain-free for the first time in more than a decade. When they called me, which they did every few months, I was cordial and polite. But I didn't offer much. I asked about their lives, their golf games, their community in Arizona. I listened to them talk about the lives they'd built. And then we'd hang up and I'd go back to my life. I knew, from the way these things work, that they would eventually figure out what had happened. My brother wouldn't keep it secret, and even if he did, my parents would put the pieces together. They'd realize that I'd had the surgery, that I must have gotten the money from somewhere, that Marcus must have given it to me. And they would know, in that moment, exactly what their refusal had cost them. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was just quiet about it. I let the silence do its work. About 8 months after my surgery, my father called me. This was unusual. He didn't usually call. My mother did. My father would get on the phone when my mother handed it to him, but he rarely initiated contact. "Sarah," he said, "I need to talk to you about something." I remember thinking that this was it. This was the moment he was going to address what had happened. Maybe he'd even apologize. Maybe this was going to be the beginning of some kind of reconciliation. "Okay," I said. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he said. "And we realized that we never checked in with you about the surgery. How did that go? Are you okay?" It was such a careful, measured way of asking. He wasn't asking if I'd had it. He was asking how it went, implying that he knew I must have had it, but wanting to hear from me directly. It was the way a military man asks a question when he already knows the answer, but wants to give the other person a chance to explain themselves. "It went well," I said. "Thank you for asking." "I'm glad," he said. There was a pause. "Sarah, I want to say something, and I want you to listen without interrupting." "Okay," I said. "When you called us about the money," he said, "I said no, because I was afraid. I was afraid that if we started giving large amounts of money to help with different situations, we'd end up in a place where we couldn't take care of ourselves. I was afraid about retirement and medical costs and all the things that worry older people. And I used those fears as a reason not to help my daughter. I didn't say anything. I was listening. Your mother and I have been talking," he continued, "and we've realized that we made a mistake. Not just a financial mistake, though that's part of it. We made a mistake about what it means to be a family. You called us because you needed help. You were in pain, and you needed something from the people who are supposed to care about you most. And we said no. He paused, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Marcus told us what he did, my father said. And I've been thinking about the fact that my younger son understood something that I didn't understand. I've been thinking about the fact that I raised a daughter who served her country for 14 years, and when she needed me, I protected my comfort instead of honoring her sacrifice. I started crying at this point. Not the relief tears I'd cried when Marcus's money hit my account, but different tears. Harder ones. I'm sorry, my father said. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know that it doesn't give back what we didn't give. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we did, and I'm sorry. We talked for a long time that day. Longer than we had in years, maybe. My father asked me questions about my recovery, about my work, about my life. He listened in the way he was actually capable of listening when he decided to pay attention. My mother got on the phone, and she cried, and she apologized as well. She said that she'd been ashamed of themselves, that they'd been thinking about it constantly, that they'd wanted to reach out but didn't know how. At the end of the call, my father said something I haven't forgotten. He said, I raised you to believe in honor and loyalty, and then you showed me what those things actually mean by not punishing us for failing you. You could have been angry, you could have cut us off. Instead, you just let us know what we'd done without ever saying a word about it. I didn't respond to that because I didn't want to tell him that silence had been partly intentional, not as punishment but as a kind of mirror. I wanted them to feel the weight of what their refusal meant, and I think on some level they had. After that phone call, my father sent me money. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was significant. It was enough to pay back half of what Marcus had given me. He included a note that said, "This is money that should have been yours in the first place. I'm sorry it took so long for me to understand that." I didn't accept the money at first. I told him no. But my father was insistent in his own way, and eventually I understood that accepting it was also a form of grace. It was allowing him to do something, to repair something. So I accepted it. I also used some of that money to pay my brother back, which he absolutely refused at first. But I insisted. I told him that he had done his job, he had shown up when it mattered, and now I got to show up for him. We agreed to make it a loan that he would pay back to me dollar by dollar over time. Of course, he paid me back everything within 6 months because he'd always been like that, and I never expected anything different from him. But here's what I want you to understand, because I think this is the real heart of the story. This isn't a story about my parents being bad people or my brother being a hero. This is a story about what happens when you're willing to look at yourself honestly, when you're willing to see the ways you've failed the people you love, and when you're willing to do something about it. My father didn't have to call me. He could have let that situation sit there, unresolved, for the rest of his life. Many people do. Many parents do. They justify their decisions. They tell themselves that they did what they could. They move on without ever truly acknowledging what they didn't do. But my father was forced to acknowledge it because my brother had done something different. My brother had loved me in a way that couldn't be ignored. He'd made my parents' refusal look small by comparison. And in that comparison, my father had finally understood what he'd done. That's not revenge. That's not punishment. That's just what happens when someone steps into the space and does the right thing without making a big deal out of it. I'm sharing this story on Revenge Tall because I think there are a lot of people out there who feel like I did, who have families that are supposed to take care of them but don't, who have watched other people step up in ways their family didn't, who have felt that quiet shame of realizing that you can't depend on the people you thought you could depend on. And I want you to know that that feeling is valid. That disappointment is real. That the way your parents or your family fails you matters, and you don't have to pretend that it doesn't in order to maintain some kind of false harmony. But I also want you to know that sometimes, when you give people space to see what they've done without forcing them to defend it, they actually do. They actually see it. They actually change. I'm not saying that my relationship with my parents is perfect now. It's not. There are still ways that we don't understand each other. There are still moments when I feel that old frustration rising up. But there's also something different. There's an honesty there that wasn't there before. They know what they did. I know that they know. And we're all moving forward with that knowledge. As for my brother, he's still my brother. He's still the person who showed up when it mattered most. But he's not on a pedestal anymore. He's just my family. The kind of family member who does what family members do. The surgery is fully healed now. My knee is strong. I can do almost everything I could do before the injury, and the pain is gone completely. Sometimes I think about how different my life would have been if Marcus hadn't called, if I'd had to go with the financing option, if I'd spent years paying off additional debt for a surgery that I medically needed. But mostly, I think about that moment in my car when he said, "This is what family does." Because that moment taught me something that no amount of military training could have taught me. That's not about what you say you believe. It's about what you actually do when someone you love needs you. That's loyalty. That's the real thing, not the version we talk about and celebrate and use to justify our actions. That's just showing up. That's just deciding that someone else's pain matters more than your comfort. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where someone has let you down when you needed them most, I want you to know that that's not your failure. That's theirs. And I want you to know that there are people in this world who will show up when it matters. Sometimes they're the people you expect. Sometimes they're the people who surprise you. And if you're the kind of person who shows up, who loves without keeping score, who helps without hesitation, I want you to know that that matters. It matters more than you probably think it does. It changes people. It teaches them something about themselves that they couldn't learn any other way. I'm still working at the physical therapy clinic. I'm still living my life. I'm still in touch with my family, and we're still navigating this relationship that's been redefined by what happened. If you made it this far, if you've listened to this entire story, please subscribe to Revenge Tall if you haven't already. Drop a comment below and let me know if you've ever had an experience like this where someone stepped up for you in a way you didn't expect. And if you know someone who needs to hear that there are people out there who will show up when it matters, please share this video with them. Because that's what I'm learning, that the real victory, the real justice in a situation like this isn't revenge or anger or even an apology. It's the quiet knowledge that you don't have to be the one to fix everything. Sometimes you just have to wait long enough for other people to see what they've done. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they actually do.